research gaps may not be deemed as irrelevant because the purpose of research gaps is actually to close the links that are there in the subject area. For example, we are talking about climate change, and a lot of work has been done in climate change. And as researchers and scientists, we, instead of really going outside what is already existing, we look at what is there and look at the missing links. Why are we not solving this problem of climate? Why is it still persisting? So we look for those missing links, and that's where the research gap comes in. Okay, and I think in my own thinking, it would do is that statement says irrelevant. It may not be correct the way it is put, because I think it is a generalized statement, which is something to do with the fallacy of authority. Yeah, maybe it's trying to generalize everything that's irrelevant, but in fact, actually, the research gaps are trying to help us to identify problems in the problem area that we are dealing with, the problem that would be there. There will be no need of you going to look for something new when you have not solved the already problem that is there. You want to go and look for something new, okay? But we have already a problem which needs our solution. So I think as researchers, our focus should be on the problem that is existing and how we close up those gaps.
We are saying that research gaps are irrelevant in the 21st century is simple. It's because you go in and dig for research gaps in the research which has been conducted already. The moment you finish identifying the time you identify the gap and you try to put something across the board, you would have even forgotten where you started from. Because the moment you finish, another gap would have been found. So it's very important in the 21st century to go down there and look for real answers, for real problems to answer and transform the world, and not just to express and submit.
Yeah, for me, from our book, what we have read, and after reading also, I got convinced that it's not always that we need to look for research gaps. I think we live in a world that is very dynamic. Every day you wake up, there are new challenges that come. And if we have to be innovative, it means we need to look for new challenges and find solutions to those problems that are there. I like every time dwelling on the same. And then again, another thing is, I think there's a lot of resources that are wasted and time that is wasted. When you find a research gap, your contribution to what you think is a problem might be very minimal, might not even be there to solve anything. Probably it's not significant. No one can even refer to your work and say this is something that we can refer to sort out a problem. But if you start on something that is new, you identify it's a problem, there will be a lot of response, a lot of resources. At the end of the day, what you come up with will be very meaningful and will solve a new problem, unlike dwelling on the past.
We are trying to argue against that notion. That is arguing that it is irrelevant to have a gap. First of all, what is a gap? It's a problem identified already. So if that is the case, then it makes every sense to put this science into practice by solving a solution. Science is made more relevant when we begin to use science to solve problems. So there are already identified problems, and there are those that are yet to identify. Therefore, it is very much a fallacy to say that it's irrelevant to have a gap, because a gap in essence is a problem. And therefore, we submit that it's important to argue also that if the person arguing that it's irrelevant to have a gap, did he do a study to establish really that all the gaps are irrelevant? The answer might be a big no. He might just have scratched, just made a statement, maybe due to his own influence in the field and without doing the research using intuitions, they argue that it is irrelevant. So we submit that it is very much relevant to have a gap. And yes,
so I'm for the motion. I'm against the motion that research gaps are irrelevant in the 21st century. So research gaps are important because research requires funding. And for one to acquire funding, you need to identify a research gap. So, if there are a lot of proposals that have been submitted by UN, World Bank, and they require that the research gap is identified. So if you have a gap identified, it increases your chances of you acquiring that grant. And also, when it comes to proposal writing, when you're writing your proposal, there's a section where you have to do a SWOT analysis, where you identify the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities, and threats, and also gap analysis. So when you include that in your proposal submission, your chances of acquiring that grant are very high. And also, when you do a research that has identified the research, it creates ownership, and also it will enable you to have intellectual property towards that research. And when you have intellectual property, it will enhance innovation, it will attract funding, it will also contribute to your economic well-being. And also the other point is that research gaps helps in our policy implementation. For example, we have the national determined contribution under the Paris Agreement. So the Paris Agreement, the NDCs is supposed to be updated every 5 years. So with the updating of the NDCs, the national determined contribution, it will require you to review your policies. So the first submission was done in 2016, and then it was later updated in 2021. So with that update, the Zambian government had to now increase their ambition and added more sectors because they identified the gap. They added the transport sector as well as the liquid waste sectors to now help in the contribution of the NDCs that we have as a country. So now, after 5 years, the submission has been done this year. It was submitted on the 28th of October. So the government has realized that we've been too ambitious. So they had to now analyze where is the gap, how do we ensure that we achieve the NDCs as a country. So I support the motion that research gap is very important for policy analysis and also for acquiring of funding when it comes to research. Thank you.
Yes, I think from the angle of grabbing what someone else has said, first of all, if we are going to do research on the basis of the gap being maybe the prerequisite to finding funding, then there's a danger where basically we're going to be doing research for the purpose of funding and not for the purpose of knowledge generation. So most of the researchers basically that are focusing on gaps and funding, actually in the end may tend up to be very shallow and irrelevant in most instances. Brother Kaluva here talked about knowledge being in layers, and Mr. Salome also talked about missing links. Now, sometimes focus on gaps may actually not achieve that. And there are two ways that it may do that. One is an instance where you end up with work that is highly specialized. Highly specialized to the extent that it does not speak to the other knowledge that has been generated. And so you defeat the very fact that knowledge should actually be linked, or facts should be linked. So that's sometimes the danger that is with the focus on gaps. But also, on the part of the missing links is the fact that I think the essence of research should be to generate, understanding of existing facts. Okay, where you want to, improve the understanding of the knowledge that is currently existing. And so one of the things that can help you achieve that is to focus on researches, for example, that replication studies, for example. So a replication study is where Mr. Salome does a study. I basically adopt maybe some of his methodologies and everything else, and I apply it to my study. Okay? And that way, then we are going to begin to build the knowledge, which is basically the layers which Mr. Kaluva is talking about. But if I'm going to be looking for a gap in something that has ultimately not been done, it doesn't exist at all, then we may not advance existing knowledge because then we are looking for something else that is not there. Okay, if I could bring in another point, there is the risk of chasing irrelevance, and this point actually brought in some bit of fear in me. That what you take as a gap and something that you feel is right for your research may actually be relevant. It may be existing as a gap because people have taken it to be not necessary. And so you might actually, instead you are thinking that you are chasing on a gap, you're actually chasing on an irrelevance. And so ultimately the product of your research may actually be an irrelevance because people thought that area doesn't need to even be explored, and then you come in, you grab it, you do your research, ultimately you end up with the research that is relevant. So we need to be careful because what sometimes we may define as gaps may actually be irrelevancies.
At this level, PhD, I think we've agreed to say the researches we are going to do must be problem solving oriented. So if you look at gap filling, like what my colleagues have already talked about, you are going to fill in or to add knowledge to something which has already been done without necessarily solving a problem. And the same Professor Renat said knowledge is infinite, meaning you cannot finish it. So why should we strive to fill in a gap which really can't be filled up? Now, our group also considered one literature which was done by Anton, 2024. This literature is talking about sources of different research topics. And of our interest, we looked at the personal experience. When we wake up from our families, visit church, groupings, personal life, community, we face different problems. And we can build our researches from there, not necessarily perusing through somebody's work. And in conclusion, you're going to say that gap we want to fill in must support the problem we've already identified. So which one is coming first? So it must start with first problem solving and problem identification. Once you identify a problem, then you can bring in to say what is it that others have done in relation to this problem. That's when you can build your research from there. Not necessarily just focusing on filling up the gap, because you fill up the gap which is not even going to solve the society problem.
Being spoken by the just previous speakers is that looking for research gaps, look at our notion. Research gaps are relevant in the 21st century. We need to know that we're in the 21st century and we've got artificial intelligence now. So they are becoming relevant to look for research gaps because we've got these machines which can convert huge amount of literature in a split of a second. Why are we saying that research gaps are irrelevant? They encourage the publish or perish culture in academia, because now researchers are concentrating on small niches just for the purpose of publishing. That's why I look at research gaps as being irrelevant in our 21st century. We are not there to boast how many publications have been done. If you can do it using AI. The other issue is research gaps will normally lead to fragmented research. Instead of dealing with the real issue on the ground, like earlier on mentioned, you are going to have these fragmented studies done in bits and bits, instead of looking at the real issue, I suppose.
Okay, so it is not true that identifying gaps or researching to fill in gaps is irrelevant. That is not true. I'm against that, because it simply means, if we are going to say that, it simply means we are always going to be satisfied with whatever we have researched on, whatever knowledge we have. So we will be rigid to change, we will not have new innovations, and then we will not really know what is missing. I'll give you an example. At one point, it was said that it was believed that the earth was flat. But this isn't the case. This time around, we all say, no, the earth is spherical. And then some years back, scientists discovered the ozone layer. There was a point at which it was discovered. And then they continued researching because they wanted to know the gaps, like what really don't we know about the ozone layer. They kept studying it, examining, and in the process of trying to find the gaps, trying to study the ozone layer, they realized it was actually thinning out and there was a hole. And it was from that instance that the Montreal Protocol was, world leaders came together for that Montreal Protocol to come up with solutions. And it was at that meeting where leaders agreed to do away with some of these sprays and other products that were used, that were releasing greenhouse gases. So at the end of the day, I feel we can't really rule out the importance of ozone depleting substance, not necessarily greenhouse gases, ozone depleting substances. Yeah, so at the end of the day, we can't really rule out the aspect of filling in the gap, because it means that we will not discover new things and we will not be innovative.
Just to add on, the moment we avoid research gaps, we risk repeating or redoing research that has already been done by other people. I can assure you that almost every area on Earth has been researched before. For example, the latest CDF information is there already online if you search. So if we avoid research gaps, we're simply risking doing a repetition of what has already been done. Thank you.
When you say that there is a gap, there is a process, a rigorous process in science that goes to show those gaps. It doesn't mean that we just say, no, here is a gap, let me fill it. No, this is serious science, serious instruments, serious tools trying to research. For example, when you're doing literature, you go to systematic reviews, maybe a condensation of about maybe 100 papers. Then they show you to say, really, this is this, but this is still a problem, and this one. Future research, therefore, can consider that. And therefore, funded research looks at how serious the problem is, and then they begin to fund. So we should not belittle to say chasing funds, because the real funded research are those even bringing breaking knowledge which you can share, and you become the pioneer in the field. As long as you're not going to be a pioneer in your field, then you're just going to be, then it's not worth it doing a PhD. Because then you're just the average, they're like a technocrat just following procedures in an institution, sorting problems without methodology, just running up and down. Therefore, I want to submit, as I still maintain that we are against this idea of this person who said it is irrelevant. It is actually very relevant, because it is not as simple as just finding a gap anyhow. It has to be a systematic way using science, and these tools can show you to say really there is a problem, and therefore can attract funding because there's a problem.
Two issues. The first one, I want to respond to my colleague Laura, where she's referring to issues to do with policy, and we're saying that most of this gap research that people are doing is basically just to source funding. We'll still insist on that with proven examples. For instance, at some point, Ministry of Agriculture in Zambia sought for funding, and they went into some partnership with IFAD, where IFAD was funding projects to improve, to come up with new varieties of seeds. Let's just seed production, like multiplication would say. They develop and then they multiply and supply to the farmers. So there are a lot of agriculture camps that we visited in the northern and Wapula, where there are those activities that were being done. At the end of the day, you realize that most of those who are writing those proposals might not even be from the ministry. They will look for somebody who is going to give convincing language. Their motive is to get money, not that they want the work on the ground to be done. Another one is that even if you're saying research gaps should be focused on, to what end? We will continue focusing on one issue. Today, somebody is going to say, let me see, this research that was done is like they forgot this. You find something. Again, tomorrow somebody else. So it's like one topic being sought in perpetuity.
I read something that talks about where people just become so crafty and use semantics in the name of wanting to create an impression that there's a gap. So most of the times, that is basically where you find yourself in, because people are just now being so crafty with words, and then they convince you it is a gap, when it is actually not really a real issue. So the focus should basically be on the real issues, real problems, and that is the only way we are going to run away from semantics that doesn't solve the problem. And if we are to talk about innovativeness, I don't think there's innovativeness if I'm having to go into her work and then I'm looking and trying by all means, whatever the case, to find something that I don't take that as innovativeness. I feel innovativeness is where I should sit and think. Okay, I should sit and think. Like someone said, I should think and look at my environment, look at the problems that I have, and then begin to think about how I can solve that. There's no innovativeness if I'm going to go in a library, blank, begin to read, and then try to say, no, there's something, maybe there's some word here that this person did not use, and then I pick that up as a gap, and then I focus my research on that. I think there's very little innovativeness in that.
Research gaps are irrelevant. Why? By the time you are doing your paper, another one would have come with another gap from your own paper. I would like to counter what Mr. Collins Kalula mentioned, to say you need methods. Yes, when you ask the right questions, when you ask what is misunderstood, you have to have methods. We're not saying I'm going to jail with methods. So it is important to become innovative, ask the right questions, go on the ground and get the right, the real problems to be transformed. You need to transform the world. You are not just going to do things to express or to impress who. No, we want to sort these issues as they come. For instance, at the moment, we are just coming out of a drought. We have scientists, they are there. But what have we learned from the drought? Have we developed a concept paper which can sort out our problems since we are coming out of a drought? We knew this information was there, but people were there, and they didn't go and tell our communities what is required of them to survive during a drought. And yet information is there. We go to our branch, special collection, information is there. They have remained as theories, but we have not gone to the. We need a research that will speak to the Esibuko, that will speak to the resident in that community, how they should use the water, how they should use the vegetation. For instance, if we were to pick another example, many of the times we thought Chitemeno was a bad mode of doing agriculture, but somebody turned out a coin. Chitemeno turned out to be one of the vibrant mode of doing agriculture. You don't cut all the trees, you harvest your maize, 2-3 years you shift to another one. The forest regenerates because people are trying to sort out the problem. But people told me Chitemeno was a bad thing because somebody thought so. There was no innovation. We have to be original in our doing things. Innovation, we submit.
Because all these submissions still come back to the gaps. Because if you are talking about the issues that are there on the ground, how do you identify those issues if you have no literature backing? So
we have to be practical in the solutions that we need to find. If you're going to be bookish and always say, let's look at this, like I said earlier on, you are going to just write something that is going to be convincing to the eye. Meanwhile, it's not even something that will sort out the real problems that we have. So even if we say we have to go the way of finding gaps, like I said earlier on again, it's going to be on and on and on. This one does this research, another one goes on to it. And then in the end, we find that there's no one who even looks at the solutions that were found by the other one to say, let's try to use them to see if anything can work. It's all just writing and piling up. From the time the University of Zambia was opened up to where we are now, you go everywhere in the departmental rooms here, you find there are heaps of books. No one has ever come to refer to any of that to solve any problem. We have failed because we are looking at issues from the literature or from the gaps that you are identifying. But if you have to go on the ground and see what problems that we really have, there are many others. For instance, you are a technocrat and you are dealing with a politician. If really we were looking at the gaps, we should have by now found a way of shutting up the politician so that we advance the development that we really need. But the politician still has the final say at the end. Why hasn't you, who has done a lot of literature, found a way of making sure that this politician, you write a constitution for them that they are going to respect, you're going to develop programs that they are going to follow without interfering and without your job being at risk? Doing is not even talk.
As we would want to conclude, we want to say, in a modern society where we are today, as opposed to our colleagues, we are not interested in filling up the gaps. We are interested in transforming the world. The real world requires real solutions to real problems. We submit.
I just also wanted to submit that I think I have not been convinced by my colleagues on why research gaps are relevant. I think that is the point. So they've not filled in the gap.
Okay, so filling in gaps in terms of research actually provides solution to real life problems that we may experience or we may witness in our communities. For instance, at one point, HIV and AIDS was a death sentence, but not anymore. It's because somebody sat down and realized there was a gap, and that person provided a solution. We don't even know who that person is. I don't know if any of you know, but we do know that people have benefited from that. So filling in research gaps is very important. Yes.
Okay, thank you. My colleagues have been talking about sorting out sorting out a problem in the communities. But let me tell you that literature also tells us that the other definition for research gap is research problem. So you're basically just defending our points.
Yes,
thank you.
that's what I was saying.
I want to dwell on what the madam presented to say there is a document on climate change which is being revisited. Have we sat down to think of what can cause that? Because basically speaking, that could be a problem of dwelling on those gaps we're talking about. Because people did not analyze that issue practically. They just looked for a gap and they produced that document, which is now being revisited. Are we saying we didn't have experts by then who could have thought that this is a developing country and we need to do some pollutions here and there for industrial development? We had experts, but they neglected the practical part of it and just went on the gap of saying, no, maybe this part was not researched on. So if you are going to develop as maybe Africa or as a country, we really need to be practical oriented. And for a problem to exist, there's a document by Augustine Chimwanga 2022 who said for a problem to exist, all you need is just a form of discomfort or to look at the community and what they are going through. Then you can create a problem. They are not necessarily saying I'm going to fill out a gap somewhere. Therefore, research gaps are not relevant when it comes to real practical solving research documents. If you are going to produce a problem-based solution, then we need just to be problem-oriented and not focusing on filling the gaps.